Wake up at Holiday Inn Express to a can't-miss breakfast that's free with every stay. Count on all the hot, fresh coffee you need and an incredible breakfast buffet that has something for everyone, like eggs, cinnamon rolls, and even hot, fresh pancakes with all the toppings you crave. Next time, do yourself a favor and stay at a Holiday Inn Express with a can't-miss breakfast that's free with every stay. So, when you wake up at Holiday Inn Express, you'll wake up happy. A part of IHG Hotels and Resorts.
Red, you go. Where shall I go? What shall I do?
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
My name is Richard Dix, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen? All right, and welcome back to another episode of How Did That Happen? HDTH. This week's episode, I believe, is episode 74. We are chugging right along here on our way to number 100. The topic for today is the American Civil War. We're going to find out how that happened. We're going to take it all the way back to at least before the 1800s and then run you right up until the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860. But before we get there, a little housekeeping to get through. Let's see, I'm not sure if there's much to mention. It's the summertime, so it's always hard to kind of get things done. Got a lot of things on the plate. People are always gone, vacations and stuff like that. It's not the easiest thing to get done. This podcast, in my mind, is, I'll be honest, has been on other things throughout these past couple weeks and months. But we want to keep putting episodes out there because people keep coming to listen, keep coming every week to find out how things happen. So we want to be there for you guys. Let's see, what am I watching here before we get started? What am I watching? I just watched a true crime doc that is on Max, that new combination of Paramount or not Paramount. What was it? Discovery Plus or whatever it is. It's Max now. But the documentary is about a girl who goes missing in the 80s. She was never found, and her brother was not there when she went missing. He was in college, but he thinks that it was their parents who killed her, and that is like the basis for the entire documentary. I will say, we find out at the end that it probably wasn't her parents. We don't know for sure, but we don't find out who. But they kind of have an idea. Could or could not be true. What I'm telling you is worth checking out. Definitely held my attention for 4 episodes. What am I listening to? I actually just listened to this thing called Scamanda, which is just it's about this woman who kind of uses cancer to get stuff she wants in her community, gets people convinced that she's about to die. So they, give her money for treatment, but no one knows where that money's going to. It's a classic story, but it's just interesting to hear that it's still happening. And it just, if you're looking for something to fold laundry to, that one's probably for you. It's pretty good. I haven't quite finished it, but I've gotten up to the point where people are kind of figuring out, hey, this woman is not maybe as sick as she says she is. But yeah, that's Scamanda. That's on anywhere you find podcasts. Like I say, as always, if I can plug those shows, I can plug my own mini-sode. This podcast has its own mini-sode, of course. It's called Bite Size Bios. BSB, we've covered 31 different people from society. I think our most recent one was on the notorious RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was our last episode this past week. But yeah, we're going to keep that coming. That comes out every other Monday, 4:30 a.m. Always find any extras over at htthappen.com. The socials are at htthappen. Like and subscribe wherever you find this. 5 stars if you love it, 2 stars if you didn't love it. Tell us why you didn't love it, because constructive criticism is always welcome. Let's see, there's not much to get into today before we get to the actual episode. So without further ado, as we're known to do, here is the episode. All right, so for our breaking old news today, I don't actually have a great one. I wouldn't build this as great. But what I've been trying to do with this segment is have to do something that's pertinent to the actual topic that we're covering, and that is that. This is definitely that. This comes from the Richmond Times-Dispatch. I believe this is 1922. And why this is interesting to me is just because it is basically a full-page letter written by the business houses of Richmond. It's kind of like a love letter written to them were written from them to the Civil War veterans, the gallant boys in gray, as they call them. And it's interesting because I live in Richmond, and I know, this really was the capital of the Confederacy. And if you live here, you can feel it. You can still feel it. It is very much, there's a grip here that was never really let go. But they mentioned that in here. So I'll just read to you this full page letter. It's not very long, but because they use pretty big font, that the business houses of Richmond have written to the gallant boys in gray. So we men of the new Richmond have not forgotten the deeds of the past. Our precious heritage, written down in history by those who fought for the cause of the Confederacy, the efforts and sacrifices of you men in gray live in our memory. Welcome here to enjoy the hospitality of the South in the historic capital of the old Confederacy. Remember, and that's in all caps, remember that our hearts beat warmly for you, that there is nothing we would not do in expression of our appreciation. This is a great day for Richmond, the day Richmond can salute again its gallant defenders of days gone by. They just, I don't know. I thought that was worth putting in here. Just because, with all this, I don't know, just with all the stuff with the statues, you see that this is 50 to 70, this is 60 years after this war that they lost. It has happened, and they're taking out a full page ad to just say, hey, we remember what y'all tried to do, and we really appreciated that. Love you, buddy. Okay, bye. Just, yeah, it's a little odd sometimes. But yeah, so that's this week's edition of Breaking Old News. We'll get on with the rest of the show. All right, so for this week's episode, Civil War, the American Civil War is the topic. I found myself, kind of hemming and hawing over this for a while, not sure what to do about it, how to approach it. Of course, like most things in my life, overthinking it, until I really realized, I said to myself, Richard, because I kept thinking, I have to explain to them the Civil War, I have to explain to them all the important parts of it, I have to tell them, I don't know. It's some of it's opinion based, but not all of it's opinion based. But I was thinking of just thinking too much. Then I realized I don't have to do all that. I have to just give you the plot points, the bullet points of how the war started, how we got here. That's the name of the name of the podcast. How did that happen? So once I got that in my head, it made it a little bit easier to kind of go forward. What I will do, because we're not even really going to talk about the Civil War itself so much today. We're really going to talk about the things that led up to it, a couple other tidbits that surround it, but the Civil War itself is probably going to be for a whole nother episode, or if it's even necessary, I'd have to rephrase the question. How did the Civil War happen is what we're trying to answer here. I'm not sure how I would get to the rest of it without a completely different question. But the American Civil War, it went from 1861 to 1865. It's known, among us as the Civil Wars, but there's civil wars that happen all across the world, different countries and continents. It was fought between the Union and the Confederacy, the Union, of course, being the North, Confederacy being the South. The main central cause of the war is the dispute over slavery and whether it should be permitted to expand into Western territories, which would, of course, lead to more slave states. Now, that's the bullet, just fully glossing over what is the Civil War. Like I said, what we're going to do, what we like to do here, is go back and talk to you about how it happened. How did the Civil War come to be? How did we have a country as great as the old US of A, and we get to a point where we just cannot agree internally, and we have to split up into two different countries and fight each other to find out who actually has the best opinion, basically. So, like we said, the Civil War starts in the 1860s. America had been a colony, I think, from the 1600s until about 1800. So for about 180 years, America was a colony. Then which slavery was a large part of it. It was definitely the foundation and basis for which a lot of the buildings in society were created. The slave labor was a part of that. We get to the early 1800s, and what we see is America is starting to have a different feeling about slavery as time goes on. We enter, I think, of course, the European slave trade was outlawed before slavery even started, and people were what America was finding was we were now expanding as a country. We were coming out of the 13 colonies. We were leaving Massachusetts and North Carolina and going further west. And the question was, when these new states become states, is slavery legal? Is slavery, going to be a continued part of what America is? That was the question that we were having to ask ourselves as American citizens during that time. And so what I'll touch on right now before we get to some other parts is kind of just the first little, I don't know how to describe this. I'm going to explain to you Nat Turner's Rebellion just for a little bit. And I think this is one of the things that begins to, or helps to create a national conversation around slavery, is that when people find out about these different little rebellions from slaves on different plantations throughout the country, is one of the things that helps people talk about, is this really what we should be doing? Oh, we have a new state coming up in America. Do we want to make that a slave state too? Those are the real questions that America is just going back and forth with for years and years before we even get to the Civil War. So for Nat Turner's Rebellion, in August of 1831, a slave named Nat Turner incited an uprising that spread throughout several plantations in Southern Virginia. Turner and approximately 70 of his cohorts killed around 60 white people. This got pretty graphic, pretty vicious. The deployment of the militia and infantry and artillery suppressed the rebellion eventually after about 2 days. 55 slaves, including Nat Turner, were tried and executed for their role in the insurrection, and almost 200 more were just lynched during the craziness that was that rebellion. Even if you weren't a part of the mob, you were about to get lynched because they were just mad at black people because they had an uprising. But that was one of the things. It was considered one of the bloodiest rebellions, I think, in the American South during that time. And actually, Virginia lawmakers reacted to this crisis by rolling back what few civil rights slaves already had, and the free black people that also were there too. They lost their rights. Education was prohibited. The right to freely assemble was severely limited. But this is one of the first. And this is in 1830. This is literally 30 years before the Civil War happened. 30 years before all the events that we'll see transpire. But this gets in the newspapers. People see this and they want to talk about it. And it does, like I said, it furthers the conversation about what we are doing as a country as we begin to expand. Because I feel like it was really easy to do. It was really easy to just this is what it is, bygones be bygones or whatever. If it's just the American South or the 13 colonies, but when we start opening things up into places like Kansas, Nebraska. I mean, even I don't know if we'll get to it today, but like California, there was an idea about whether California would be a slave state. I actually read an article. That's a lie. I read a title of an article that said that California is still a slave state. I didn't know because I didn't read it. Don't really know where they were going with that, but it's just an interesting parallel to this topic that we're dealing with right now. So yeah, Nat's Rebellion, like I said, big issue as far as kind of one of the kickers that kind of gets people talking about the idea of slavery and wanting to abolish slavery. And so, like I said, as we continue to expand out into the West, as Americans do, there's the inevitable question of how these territories would treat the issue of slavery when they were eventually promoted to state. And so, one way they had chosen to kind of go about this was exhibited in the Compromise of 1850, which had at least temporarily solved the problem by permitting residents of Utah and New Mexico. They had the ability to decide their own fate with slavery by having a. And so basically, the idea was let new states decide for them. In this, well, I mean, it sounds good. I think it sounds good from like a helicopter perspective, but I don't think it was actually what was needed. And I think that bears out as we watch and see what comes next. So the next set of states to kind of come on the horizon was Kansas and Nebraska, done by the Kansas and Nebraska Act of 1854. This was also done by taking Indian lands and creating new territories to give to Americans to make a state, yada, yada, yada. And the act was proposed by Senator Stephen A. Douglas of Illinois as a way to appease Southern representatives in Congress who had resisted earlier proposals to admit states from the Nebraska Territory because of the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which had explicitly forbidden the practice of all slavery in the U.S., north of the 3630 latitude and west of the Mississippi River. So this kind of really scared some of the Southerners in Congress because they were afraid that the more free states that got added to the Union would make their opinions matter less. Basically, you have less guys in there who believe in what you believe in if we keep letting in people who don't believe in slavery. Now, I have a timeline here of the 1850s, which when I initially put it in my notes, I thought would mean something, but now upon further inspection, can't find its pertinence whatsoever. I'm not even sure, I'm scrolling through it right now. It's worth maybe mentioning the presidents that were president during this time. Let's see. President Taylor dies in 1850. Vice President Fillmore becomes the 13th president because he died. Let's see, anything else here? A lot of treaties, a lot of stuff like that. A lot of fighting with the Indians, getting more land, yada, yada, yada. 1855, the Farmers High School, which becomes Penn State, that's founded. That's, completely separate than what we're talking about. But what we're going to get into really now are a couple events that I feel like are, I wouldn't say they're left out, because they're definitely, they're listed, but I think people always want to think about Alabama, Tennessee, and, South Carolina as being like, and like Massachusetts and Virginia and all those being like the people who were really involved in the Civil War. And it's like, yes, they were the big players. Yes, they were the guys who were the movers and shakers of that time. But what really set these events into motion, like I said, was the continued westward expansion of America. And we find that the issues that resided there, we really see them come to light in things like the sacking of Kansas, the sack of Lawrence. The sacking of Lawrence, I'm getting it all mixed up. It could be any of the three that I just said. So the sacking of Lawrence occurred on May 21st, 1856, right? And this is when pro-slavery settlers, led by Douglas County Sheriff Samuel J. Jones. So there was, you want to call him Samuel L. Jones, but Samuel J. Jones, right? So he was leading the pro-slavery settlers. They attacked and ransacked Lawrence, Kansas, a town which had been founded by anti-slavery settlers from Massachusetts, and they were hoping to make Kansas a free.
Attention car shoppers. Right now at South Carolina Federal Credit Union, you can get a new or used auto loan and pay nothing until 2024, and no payments for 90 days means nothing out of pocket going into the new year. Plus, we have flexible rates and terms, so you could make the best financial choice for you. Learn more at scfederal.org/auto loans. That's scfederal.org/auto loans. Certain restrictions apply. Existing South Carolina federal credit loans are excluded.
So the incident fueled irregular conflict in the Kansas Territory, and this later came to be known as Bleeding Kansas. So we're going to get to Bleeding Kansas, and I mentioned it, I think, here on the podcast before, only because it's very interesting, and the name of it just sounds like a Netflix series. It writes itself, guys. I mean, if we're watching 1833 or whatever, I mean, I know it's Paramount, from like the prequels to Yellowstone and all this stuff. Like, man, make a show about the pre-Civil War, like pro-slavery, anti-slavery antics that happened in the Midwest. I mean, Bleeding Kansas needs to be a show. Now, back to the actual sacking of Lawrence. This would not be a bloodbath, so to speak. The actual human cost was very low. I think only one person died from this, and it was a member of the pro-slavery gang, and his death was actually accidental. However, this was enough to make them pretty. And so, of course, like any good sacking, there is a response. There is a retaliation. And what do we have? What is the response to the sacking of Lawrence? We have the Potawatomi Massacre. And this occurred May 24th, 1856. I believe, a mere 3 days later. So 3 days later, and still in the Kansas Territory, the Potawatomi Massacre occurs, and it is a reaction to the sacking of Lawrence by the pro-slavery forces on May the 21st. And it is called the Potawatomi Massacre because it occurred on the Potawatomi Creek, and was also had to do with some Potawatomi members, I believe, of the actual Indian Society. So just north of the Potawatomi Creek in Franklin County, 5 pro-slavery settlers were killed in front of their families, no less. And this soon became the most famous and infamous of the many violent episodes of the Bleeding Kansas period. So this is all kind of in Bleeding Kansas. I mean, imagine these guys. So because they believe in slavery, which no one says, I mean, obviously you shouldn't, that's not the move, but they came and just killed these pro-slavery guys right in front of their families. That's pretty wild. Obviously, no one's going to like that. And this may be as good a time as any to talk about our good friend John Brown. Now, I did not know much about him until a couple years ago when they made a Showtime show about him. If you hear I'm typing things up here because I'm going to go find us a page about John Brown, the abolitionist. Now, the Showtime show was about basically the same time, and about him trying to free slaves and get people to come to his viewpoint on how slavery is. But it's done by Ethan Hawke is the main character. He plays John Brown in the show, and man, it is worth it. It is worth your time. I'm not just going to break off into a recommendation here, but when I tell you, I forget what it's called. Let me find that too. Matter of fact, let me give you that. John Brown Showtime series. It's something about birds. the good Lord Bird. I tell you. I mean, am I right when I'm right? The good Lord Bird on Showtime. Telling you, they knock it out of the park. Back to our friend John Brown. So he was born May 9th, 1800. And he died December 2nd, 1859. Now, he's worth bringing up because he's the guy in all this bleeding Kansas stuff who was getting things done. You know, it's his group of people who killed those 5 pro-slavery guys in front of their families. Like, he was really, he's worth mentioning because I feel like you talk about a lot of abolitionists, Frederick Douglass, stuff like that, Harriet Tubman. This dude was out here and he wasn't even black. He was murdering people and he wasn't even black. I don't know. Like, it just seems, it must be noted. I mean, you can't, I was surprised to find that there was a man out here, a white man out here murdering in the name of anti-slavery. I mean, color me interested, confused, and surprised all at once. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a quick overview of just the overall, see if I can, anything else I wanted to cover about Bleeding Kansas before we move along. There'll be one more instance that I feel is also another catalyst for what started the slavery, started the Civil War, and then that'll pretty much almost be it. We'll have a couple more things to cover, but as far as like what started the Civil War, I think we'll at least have covered enough for me to feel like this is a worthy episode. So let's see. Yeah, Bleeding Kansas, which, like I said, it just has to be a Netflix show coming to you fall 2023, starring Willem Dafoe and I don't know who else could be who would be good in there. I want to say Willem Dafoe, Ethan Hawke. Oh, and like Michael B. Jordan, right? Wouldn't that be wild? Yeah, get some Wakanda love in there. But back to Bleeding Kansas. So it was a series of violent civil confrontations, as we kind of said, that happened in the Kansas Territory, and this was between 1854 and 1859. It emerged from the political and ideological debate over the legality of slavery in the proposed state of Kansas. It was characterized by years of electoral fraud, raids, assaults, and murders carried out in the Kansas Territory and neighboring Missouri by pro-slavery border ruffians and anti-slavery free staters. According to Kansapedia, which should not be a thing, Kansapedia of the Kansas Historical Society, 56 political killings were documented during this time, but the total could be as high as actually 200. So possibly 200 people died in the course of about 4 years while people were trying to decide if Kansas was going to be a free state or not. I feel like this stuff, while mentioned, barely gets left out of the history book. And it has been called a tragic prelude or an overture to the American Civil War, of which it immediately followed. I mean, because like we said, this is done in 1859. Less than 2 years later, we would be at war. And like I said, this was really important because once they became a state, the 2 new senators that came from Kansas would basically kind of affect the balance of power in the United States Senate. So there's a lot of stuff at stake here. I can't articulate it enough. I really don't think I'm doing it justice. And I've said before, and I think I will at some point, just do an episode just on Bleeding Kansas itself, because I think it gets just overlooked as to how important this was to all parties involved. Like I said, when this becomes a state, when Kansas becomes a state, the senators that go to Washington, their viewpoint kind of shifts the whole like landscape of the idea of slavery. So no wonder people are here killing and committing fraud and assaults, because this is bigger than just a new state. This is bigger than when we got Hawaii, or when we would get Hawaii, or whatever. You know what I mean? This is bigger than when we got Idaho. You know what I mean? This is a very important time in American history. And like basically, I'm reading more. My notes are kind of trying to describe this. It was a state level civil war. Basically, the state of Kansas was going against itself for 4 years. So that basically we had a state civil war, and then that led over into the whole national civil war. I mean, it actually had 2 different capitals. The state of Kansas during this time had 2 different capitals. It had the pro-slavery capital of Lecompton and the anti-slavery capital of Lawrence. 2 different constitutions. I mean, this is literally, it was a microcosm for what would then become the status, I'm not sure which way, the state of what American politics would become. Who knew? So that's pretty much that with the Bleeding Kansas. Like I said, I hope I got it across to you. Maybe you'll go find a book about it. Something it is worth delving into, because it is really, I think, it's the precursor to the American Civil War. I think more than anything else probably is in the history books. And so we have one last thing that one last thing that I think is a catalyst for basically one of the things that kind of created the Civil War was the caning of Charles Sumner, or otherwise known as the Brooks-Sumner Affair. And this occurred on May 22nd, 1856. For the record, right around the same time as the sacking of Lawrence and the Pottawatomie Massacre. This was just happening in Washington. So it just shows to you just how tumultuous this time was. I mean, on all parts of America, people are fighting, literally fighting about the idea of slavery and whether it should continue to occur or not. So this happened in the United States Senate chamber when Representative Preston Brooks, a pro-slavery Democrat from South Carolina, used a walking cane to attack Charles Sumner, an abolitionist Republican from Massachusetts. The attack was a retaliation for a speech given by Sumner 2 days earlier in which he fiercely criticized slaveholders, including pro-slavery South Carolina Senator Andrew Butler, a relative of Brooks, who was about to do the cane. The beating nearly killed Sumner and contributed significantly to the country's polarization over the issue of slavery. It has been considered symbolic of the breakdown of reasonable discourse. We can't even talk anymore. Now we're just beating people with canes on the Congress. But so yeah, I mean that's one of the last things. Like this was about 4 years before the Civil War started, but it just shows how, like I just kind of quoted, things had just devolved. Things had devolved. We had gone from, the kind of wink and a nod, 3/5 clause and all this stuff, hoping nobody asks about it, and then keep pushing slavery under the table, yada, yada, yada. And then we get to, we're making new states. What are those states going to believe in? What's their opinion? I don't know. Maybe they feel this way. Maybe they feel that way. Maybe we'll, come to your house and kill your father in front of your family. I don't know. Like, that stuff is happening. It happened over the idea of what slavery is. Cannot be overlooked. So amid all the issues that are happening in America, westward expansion, all that good stuff, the election of 1860 takes place. A new political party, the Republican Party, comes to national prominence. It was opposed to the spread of slavery throughout Western territories. Abraham Lincoln wins in an electoral college landslide, but only with 40% of the popular vote. Just 40%. And this firmly established the Democrats and Republicans as the parties of the majority in the United States, and they would continue to be up until even modern day times now. Now, why this is the real catalyst to me is less than a week later, 4 days later, from the election of 1860, when we get old Abraham Lincoln, or Honest Abe, as our president. Senator James Chestnut resigns from his Senate seat and returns home to South Carolina to draft an ordinance of secession. 1 day later, South Carolina's James Hammond also pledged support to the Confederacy with all the strength, quote, with all the strength that I have. This is 4 days after this man is elected. 4 days. 4 days after he's elected, a sitting senator resigns from his position and goes back to his home state to draft up letters to say, I don't want to be a part of this country anymore. So that, to me, that is the real catalyst to the American Civil War. We talked about a few things that lead up to it, but that is definitely the part where it's like, we ain't talking no more. And before his inauguration would even occur, 7 southern states would also secede from the Union. Weeks after his swearing in, the Confederate Army fired on Fort Sumter, and then boom goes the dynamite. We have the Civil War. And that's pretty much it as far as how it happened. Like, there's a lot of other things we can mention. There's so many things that you could talk about. So many things that you talk about. I feel like what I do feel like gets missed and will not get talked about too much in this podcast is just what America was going through from the year 1800 to the Civil War. If you really think about American history in its entirety, America had only been a country, full-on country, for like 60 years before we decided to split up and fight each other. I mean, 1776, we declare independence to Britain. What is it, 1798? No, 1789? Yes, is it 1789? We finally become a country that now has a president. You know what I mean? And then we're talking, so 70 years from that, we're like brothers and sisters who can't even live in the same house. We just have to like split off and like fight each other for like who's the best. But you think about it, we hadn't even been a country for 100 years. We don't even really have history. We're already doing this. So I think just the stuff that happens from 1800 to 1860, like we had another depression during that time. We actually ended up fighting another war with Britain directly after we became a country. The French and Indian War. We fight this like 10 years after we become a country. There's so much that's happening in that time. I just think so. Saying that to say there's more stuff that I left out that also plays into creating the Civil War. But I think we covered a decent amount of it. But before we get out of here, the last thing I wanted to cover, which has always been one of the most interesting things to me ever, I think in the history of history. This might be a little hyperbolic, but I think it's just wild. It is the idea of the Confederados. Confederados. And these are the Confederate soldiers that fled to Brazil when they knew they were going to lose the war. And their ancestors are still there. Can't make this up. It's to me, like I said, it's in you've got to. I think this will be on the Twitter account. The Twitter account. There haven't been too many reasons for me to post on there recently, but this is something you need to see. In 1866, the Confederate soldiers who had lost the war, they fled and started settling basically in South America, not just Argentina, but in South America. And they collectively purchased more than 500 enslaved and then went to Brazil. Because at the time, slavery was still legal in Brazil. So they bought their slaves, took them with them. But 2 decades later, Brazil became the last country in the Americas to abolish slavery. But we still had the culture of the Confederates. And that's what's wild to me. That's what's when I read an article about this years ago, and I almost couldn't believe that it was true. Like they still have like the festivals, like the Confederate flag is still down there. Like they're literally, I mean, the same way that we're only like maybe 3 or 4 generations removed from the Civil War. They're like 4 generations removed. So it's like you got kids there who's like their great grandfather was a Confederate soldier who came here, to escape persecution, basically from the ending of the Civil War. It is, and it's been recognized. It's been recognized by America. I think Jimmy Carter went there during his presidency. They have statues there that they put up to the Confederates. If you get a chance, check it out. If you want a YouTube rabbit hole, check it out. They're the Confederados, which of course I like to pronounce or say as the Confederados. Sounds like a lot more fun that way. But yeah, it's sometimes you look at the world and you just can't believe that it's similar. It's very similar to the Nazis that came to America after World War II and set up NASA. That's a whole different story, but it's like the same thing. You never know what's flying under the radar. All right, so that was another episode of How Did That Happen? HDTH. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope we told you some stuff you didn't know. Hope you can take that with you. And if anything, go check out Bleeding Kansas, man. Go find out some information about that. It's worth a read. It's worth a scroll on your Wikipedia, if anything. But yeah, I hope you guys liked that episode. Still trying to figure out where things are going with the topics-wise and stuff this year. I guess I'll take this time maybe to even lay out a little bit of where I see the podcast going in the next couple of years. I think someone was asking me recently what my plans are for it, and I would say, this is all tentative, but I think this is year 2 of How Did That Happen. We're in our second year here. We're in our second half of our second year, and I would say I would like to close out the end of our second year by having a guest on the podcast. That'll be a goal there. And then I want to say, because we're just going to put this out in the ether, hoping that it becomes, what it becomes. And then in year 3, I'd like to have some actual separate independent advertising. Instead of what you guys hear now, it's just kind of these filler ads that are put in here by the company that I work with. That's not, I'd like to have something where it's more like, more specific to me, and this podcast. And then maybe even on year 4, I'd like to have some sort of maybe even live show, trivia show that can kind of be, an offshoot of this podcast. So that's just an idea. Kind of just want to keep putting down the ideas and keep evolving. The whole point of this podcast is just continue to evolve and always have change be a very large part of it. But yeah, I hope you guys keep coming back from week to week, finding out how things happen. HCTHappen.com for all the extras, at HCTHappen for all the socials. 5 stars if you love this, 2 stars if you didn't love it. Tell us why you didn't love it, because constructive criticism is always welcome. I believe this is the 4th of July episode. It's coming out the day before the 4th of July, so happy 4th of July. Hot dogs and fireworks and all that good stuff. See you next week with the next Bite Size Bio.
Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Okay, round two. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Ah, sorry. We were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right. ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.